Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Pisolans, and every Saturday we look at some stories shaping our continent. This is our first episode of the month, and I hope it's not too late to say Happy New Month. So today we consider three stories. First, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company has hiked the fuel pump price from 615 naira to 897 naira per litre. This price surge comes just days after the NNPC admitted to owing suppliers over $6 billion. How will this affect Nigerians' daily lives, and is the country any closer to solving its fuel crisis? Next, we shift to the health sector, where tensions are high between the Federal Ministry of Health and the Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors. The doctors' warning strike has evoked a controversial no work, no pay rule from the government. What does this mean for the future of healthcare in Nigeria? Lastly, we turn our attention to a humanitarian crisis on the rise. The International Committee of the Red Cross has reported a 75% increase in missing persons cases across Africa in the last 5 years. Can anything be done to curb this problem? Joining me for insights on these critical stories is Samuel Atiko, a public policy analyst. Welcome back, Samuel.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for coming. All right, so the NNPC announced that it has increased its fuel pump price, and that was 2 days after it admitted to owing suppliers. I think the underlying issue here that I wanted to speak to is just the general disingenuity that we see with this corporation and then the government. I mean, for example, starting from not declaring a profit when people notice that, oh, there's a problem here. And even when Reuters reported early this year around July that, oh, the NNPC is owing over $6 billion. The NNPC came out later to say, no, the full problem is due to operational issues and all of that. And now we're getting to know, oh, they actually have a huge debt that they have to pay. And after claiming and pretending like, oh, there's no subsidy payment, or, we finally got to know that, yeah, there's subsidy payments. So why is why is there a general cover up, or should I say blatant lie? Why does government prefer to do that instead of being honest and then addressing the root causes of problems?
I think it boils down to the culture that we seems to have forced within government. We seems not to punish bad behavior. Rather, everything is seen as propaganda. And this started during the military regime when people will be killed and then you cover it up and then you even spin it and you even get glorified for taking a lead in that kind of situation. It all boils down to three things. I would say the first one is weak oversight. Unfortunately, the Senate, and then you have the National Assembly members, the broad committee that had been put in place to ensure that the truth, to continuously seek the truth and ensure that the truth gets to the public, they seems to have actually find themselves stocked up into this moldy, I'll call it this moldy mud itself. It's quite unfortunate that we find ourselves in that situation whereby truth is now becoming a thing that you push aside and then you play politics around. You play your politics around. How will I call it now? You want to throw propaganda around, at least giving, I'll call it armies of I'll call it jobless people online to troll people that seems to know where the problems are coming from and are actually laying and claiming they're actually they are actually exerting pressure on government to take real corrective measures and address those issues. Of course, that is actually keeping the working poor, the have-nots in the country, which, when we look at it, substantial amount of people, substantial amount of the population in Nigeria actually working poor or have-nots. So any policy that people keep, when you see people pushing for these people to, that government should address their fears, that government should address the issues that is actually keeping them below that poverty line. You see some armies of trolls actually coming to actually throw shades around. And what you see now is a situation whereby government are giving them the tool to do that rather than actually express what's going on in the country. There are a lot of issues around NNPC. NNPC had been notorious over the years for this. If you recall very well, at some point, governors were even complaining that NNPC was not remitting funds, and they were denying it. At some point, even the central bank, I recall, a governor came out and said, "Oh, that the central bank was actually printing money and giving it to them." And of course, people came out to deny. So it's a culture, and we're building a culture. And when you build those kind of terrible culture, of course, this is what you get. Because whether we like it or not, the truth will always win. The truth will always come out. And when it comes out, it hurts you more. And that's why we keep reiterating that government needs to step up. You need to ensure that you're transparent. Transparency itself, I keep reiterating this. Transparency, it's important not because it helps you build trust with the people. It helps you address issues of mistrust. So if investors do not trust you, they do not trust your data, they do not trust what is coming out of government, how will you convince them to make informed decisions around your economy? That's where we find ourselves as a country. And it's quite unfortunate. The NNPC that should be shaping, because everybody, whether we like it or not as a country, despite the fact that the economy is diversified, if you go outside the country, people look at Nigeria from that prism of, oh, it's a oil producing country, and everything NNPC does gets amplified. So it's quite unfortunate that we say that a bad culture that needs to be punished.
Okay, yeah. So the Nigerian government, based on reports, it shows that Nigerian government spent 3.6 naira on fuel subsidies in 2023. And in 2024, it's projected to get to 5.4 trillion naira. But even with these fuel subsidies, the price of oil is still going up. There are still focus around the country. Do you think that Nigerians are getting any tangible benefits, from the removal of fuel subsidies? It's not. It's looking like it's not advantageous to both the government who is piling up debt and then the people who are still experiencing price hike.
You see, the way I see this thing is that I don't look at things. I think the whole context and the whole argument around subsidy removal are symptomatic. I mean, I can give you a good example. If you recall, in May 2015, if you go to EIA, that's the Energy Administration in America, and you check the price of gasoline in terms of dollars, it sold then for $2.718 per gallon. If you convert that to liters, you get $0.72 per liter. That's the price of PMS. Now, if you try to convert that to naira, it comes down to 217 naira. That is the international price of PMS as at 2015, May 2015. Come down to today, the price is $3.72 per gallon. If you convert that to liters, it gives you $0.98 per liter. Now recall that people are complaining that energy cost is high globally because of that. Now, if Nigeria had maintained a stable macroeconomic environment and exchange rate had been relatively stable, the price of PMS today in Nigeria would be 302 naira per dollar. So the question is that, why are we not buying PMS for 302? Why are we buying it for how much? Now, if you do the conversion, it should actually be selling for almost 1,571 if you use the exchange rate of 1,603 that we recorded yesterday per $1. So the question is that, why are we not buying PMS, gasoline, at 302? The big elephant in the room is fiscal rascality. And that's the core of the issue. Those are symptomatic. When people say subsidy, remove subsidy, the symptom is the fact that we have increased our monetary base from 6 trillion as at May 2015 to 25 trillion. You go from 6 trillion, just imagine you are in a house and the total number of naira in that economy is 6 trillion. All of a sudden, it has gone from 6 trillion to 25 trillion. But you are still not producing enough to drive the economy agenda. And that is why the naira is collapsing. That is why you have inflationary pressure. So until we address the big elephant in the room, we will still be back here maybe in 10 years' time. Remember, if you go to 1970, this was the argument that people were pulling. If you go to 19, of course, after the Civil War, this argument around remove subsidy, not remove subsidy, had been with us. And it also coincides with the time when Nigeria, under the nationalist movement, actually adopted the naira as our own legal tender. So the irresponsibility on the part of the fiscal authority, spending money that you do not have, the irresponsibility on the part of the monetary authority, that's the central bank of the country, printing money arbitrarily for no reason, all those things are accumulating to and pointing in the direction of a very, very shaky foundation upon which the economy is being built. And that's why the price will continue to go back in circles. We keep going back in circles. So my argument is that the argument is less of subsidy. I mean, for context, everywhere in the world, transportation is being subsidized. If you look at the US, in fact, most states in America, they have funds where they subsidize transportation for the working poor, they have not, and they do it for certain reasons. Those are economic reasons, right? You can make those economic reasons. But the foundation upon which we build our economy in Nigeria, it's very shaky. And unfortunately, we've not stemmed the tide. Just for context, just to clarify, as at May of last year, the total money in the country, the monetary base, the real money in the country was 17.9 trillion. It has gone to 25 trillion. So people accuse the last government of printing money arbitrarily. This present government is also doing the same thing. And that's why we see this problem being exacerbated. We need to put a stop to this, begin to address the real relevant, create a floor upon which to build an economy. And that is when we can now begin to make those choices. Now, if you look at the pronouncement, things like around autonomy in pricing, that you see them talking about in the face of the refinery owned by Dangote, on all those big old, we seems to be rolling around. You cannot build any policy without a very solid foundation. And unfortunately, we do not have a foundation upon which to build. The big question, again, I reiterate, the big question is that why are Nigerians? That's the question Nigerians should be asking. Why are we not buying PMS, petrol, or gasoline, the way we call it in Nigeria? Why are we not buying it at 300 and what did I call it? 302 naira. Why are we not buying at 302 naira? That should be the question. And that is because the government had printed money, had created tax on the working poor and the have-not through excessive spending on frivolous items, through bad budgeting systems that do not address the needs of the working poor, the have-nots, and more importantly, through recklessness on the part of the monetary authority, making unnecessary and uninformed decisions that have made Nigerians poorer, and we will continue to make the country poorer as we move along. Until we address that foundational problem, fortunately, we are not going to see the house that we intend to build.
Okay, you mentioned Dangote refinery, so I want to ask a question on that. So recently Dangote showed a refined petrol from the refinery, and a Bloomberg report shows that the government will allow Dangote to set the price for gasoline next month, that's in October. But I'm just wondering, do you think that this arrangement between the government and Dangote refinery, do you think there's a risk of concentrating power in the hands of fewer players? I mean, in the sense that, are we going to see the creation of another monopoly in the fuel sector?
I mean, it's inevitable. NNPC has been a monopoly. It's just transferring monopoly of NNPC to Dangote refinery. I think the flip side of things is that, it's producing, it will be producing the product itself, whether it's PMS, whether it's diesel, whether it's AGO, and then all those other products. And everybody needs to flock back to him. But the big problem is, number one, the infrastructure to take products from its refinery down to the creeks and crannies of the country. That infrastructure seems to be, whether we like it or not, in the pseudo hands of the NNPC, although they tell you that they've broken down the NNPC into different chunks. That would be one of the biggest challenges. Then the second thing there is that if the price of PMS by Dangote will be controlled by Dangote. That means he will be selling it directly to marketers, and then he will decide the price in which he wants to sell that product itself. In essence, it means that if you look closely at if you look at the spot price of gasoline today in the US market, it's about $3.725 per barrel. If you try to convert to liters, that comes down to about 1 liter, $0.98 per liter. And if you try to use the exchange rate, well, depending on the exchange rate we are using, but if we use the exchange rate of 1,600 that we are seeing now, we are talking about a liter of PMS retailing for 1,570 or something like that. That's going to be a big problem, right? We are going from 800 and something to 1,000. So the question is that how will Dangote compete in that market? It will be difficult if NNPC continue to import in, and then we have this unnecessary friction. And we know in Nigeria that one of the most important tools that all these retailers have used to force government's hand into surrender is very simple. It's the supply security. They use supply security and what you call scarcity manipulation. And that's what you see in the country. Anytime you see scarcity, they are trying to push the price up. So are we going to get into a situation whereby marketers already soaking things from Dangote, maybe they have incentive, begin to use that to actually gouge the price of goods and services in the country? And to think about it, the oversight body that have been put in place in Nigeria have been weakened. If we look, for instance, we look at the Consumer Protection Agency that we have in Abuja, at some point in time, I think they were doing well, but now they seem to have dropped the balls. The question is that we live in a country where instruments that have been put in place to protect citizens seems to be weak, and that's where the biggest fear is. And that's why I keep going back to my point that I make earlier, that I think we Nigerians need to focus more on fixing those fundamental foundational issues, so they don't have to talk too much to Dangote or this one ABC. Once you can fix those things, I think, yeah, if price is stable, there's no inflationary pressure. If I have to pay PMS for 300 today, it won't be much of a burden on me. But as we are now, maybe by next year or by next year, December, people may be buying PMS for almost 1,500, 1,600 if we are not careful. And it can continue like that until we stem the tide. I think that's my biggest concern about this present policy submission around Dangote.
All right. Thank you. So moving on to our next story, which is about Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors strike over the kidnap of one of their colleagues, Dr. Ganiyat. And so when they went on the strike, the government responded by just saying that there was going to be a no work, no pay rule, just implementing this no work, no pay rule, which means if they don't stop striking and then back to work, they were not going to be paid. Do you think the government is stone deaf? Is this the right approach, the right response to this particular strike?
I think for me personally, I've always taken the side of labor in every decision that relates to negotiating with government. But let's think about it this way. The National Association of Resident Doctors calling a strike because one of their members were kidnapped in December and government had failed to act. Now, the question is that when they withdraw their service, who bears the brunt? It's the Nigerians. Nigerians actually do bear the brunt. And this strike, was it informed by things that relate to government not meeting their welfare needs? Not necessarily. Well, when we look at it from the other side of things also, showing empathy to the family that have been kidnapped, yes, there's a problem, there's a need to act. Well, if government is not acting, so you could have those. So again, it's a very complicated situation we find ourselves. And the unfortunate truth is that majority of Nigerians are also facing the same problem. Whether you're a driver, especially people that move people from, say, Abuja to Kaduna, majority of them have been kidnapped without respite. Remember, there was a railway situation that people were kidnapped in. So Nigerians are the ones facing the brunt. Now, this strike also affects Nigerians more than even the government. To be sincere, the key government officials will find their healthcare needs. If they have to jump on a private jet and jet out, they will do that. The people that will bear the brunt are also still Nigeria. So the insecurity issues, Nigeria actually at the receiving end. The strike by resident doctors, Nigerians are on the receiving end. So the big question is that what should the government do to stem the tide? And that's why we keep saying that it's important, because again, the primary responsibility of government is to ensure that there's security and safety in the country. That again, those are foundational issues to begin to build your economy on. Now, back to your question around what government should do. Now, well, they called for a strike and then they did a warning strike. After that, government is saying we will not pay you because you did not work. Well, I don't know. Where do I stand in here? I think personally, I think when you're dealing with labor, I think the most important pillar there is to have constant dialogue. And that's why I've always been an advocate of a very robust public participatory system where government officials are consistently and constantly, or not on a daily basis, but rather on an hourly basis, they are taking feedback from government. They are taking feedback and they are giving feedback to the people. I think the problem here is that the government has not demonstrated clearly that they are taking action to rescue this person from the kidnappers' den. Just like we have thousands of people also in kidnappers' den that have not been rescued. And on the flip side also, because the information is not coming, whether they are acting or they are not acting, whether they are taking actions or they are not taking action, the people on the other side also are not clear whether government is taking action. And that has created a situation whereby we have to use our bargaining power to force government to give us information. Now, the question is that, are you responsible for paying for that? I think the government needs to actually take a step back around what they've done. They need to ask themselves the hard questions. Why was this strike called? What was our fault? And then address those issues, not using force. Force does it. For instance, if they call for another strike, another round of strike, what will you do? Sack them the way it was done in Lagos some years ago and employ new people. The truth is that most of them are walking out of the country anyway. They have alternative everywhere in the world and they can jump off and then they find other countries that will more likely pamper them. So government needs to actually take a soft stand, especially when it comes to this, on one side, and then on the second side also, I think you need to institute a robust public participatory system where you're giving citizens, people, information on an hourly basis. And that's why when you look at the US, when you look at the UK, information is very, very paramount on how you pull off and you demonstrate to people that you are taking action around issues in the country. Unfortunately, that's not what we've been seeing here in the country.
Okay, so the underlying issue, yes, it's the security issue. I had one of the doctors saying that sometimes these kidnappers take doctors specifically because they want someone to treat, to cater for the health of people they've kidnapped or even the kidnappers themselves. And looking at the threatening security situation in Nigeria's northern regions where we have insurgency, banditry, kidnapping, and all of this. How can fragile states, in the north, facing widespread violence, how can they safeguard their healthcare infrastructure from collapsing? And how can they protect doctors who are increasingly getting targeted by criminal and terrorist groups?
I recall looking closely at I'll call it some indices around primary health care system. Now, if you look closely at the health system in Nigeria, you have the primary health care system. Within the primary health care system, you have different divisions. You have the health centers, so the multiplicity is there. At that level already, you're talking about 40,000 facilities scattered across the country. Most of them don't even have fence. So the question is that the frontline health workers in those facilities, how do you guide them? Now, at that facility, that's a big problem. The second thing is that most of them commute, right, between that facility and their home. How do you guide them in those situations? So if you put up the entire security architecture of Nigeria to protect just the health system itself, it will fail. That is the truth. So that's a big ask. And it comes down to the core issue. And I'm sure SBN has been showing people clearly that we need a complete makeover of how we see security. I think Nigeria still carry this toga of mixing security and defense together as one. They are completely different concepts. Security is the prevention of crime. Defense is when you're responding to an issue. It's more reactional. Security is proactive. So it's not just about putting security men around people and doing it. It's not even possible because, again, how many people wants to guide the facility, guide the road, guide them at home? It's not possible. And that begs the big question. What have we done after what happened? Nigerian people actually called for a complete remaking of the Nigerian police system. We've not done much. And that's the truth. We've not done much. We are just rolling around in circles as a country. To get our security architecture up and doing, we need to invest more in it. And unfortunately, we don't even have the resources to do that. So how do we go about it? There are a lot of foundational issues that need to put in place. Number one, people must have trust in the justice system. Unfortunately, that has been lost. I mean, we talked about that the last podcast. People need to trust the police system, meaning that you are 100% correct. I mean, if you proactively inform the police about unnecessary things going on in your community, you are rest assured the actions will be taken and you will not be, of course, you will not face the consequences. That is not there. There's a trouble gas in there. So we have a massive issues to actually deal with when it comes to when it comes to insecurity in the country. My big question here is that based on the present infrastructure that we have, it's impossible, I mean, to even secure Nigerians, talk less of secure doctors. They can't even secure government officials, let's be sincere. We've seen politicians actually being killed in this country. We've seen even military bases have been attacked in the country without any, prisons have been attacked in the country without much being done about it. So my big take here is that I think it's time for government to listen, take a close look at themselves and admit that we failed. I mean, the first step for you, the first step in policy response is admitting that there's a problem here. Once you know that there's a problem here and you understand the root cause of the problem, you address those root causes. And when you address those root causes, definitely, virtually every other thing will fall in place. I think that's where government needs to take a look at. They need to admit that, yes, our security systems have failed and we need to rebuild a new security system that works for the Nigerian people, not just for the regime itself or the government officials that are responsible. I think if we can get that going, I think we build trust. Maybe we'll begin to see improvement as we move along.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to our last story, which is about a report from the international community of the Red Cross, reporting a 75% rise and increase in missing persons cases across Africa and including Nigeria. So, what would be like the major factors contributing to this increase, especially here in Nigeria?
I think three things are very obvious here. I think the first one is the armed conflict. And then you have the national disaster happening. And then more importantly, those dangerous migratorial journeys that people take. Those are those are the building blocks, at least when you look at what the report is saying. But that said, if you look at armed conflict, I think over concentration, I always tell people that if you look at the entire Middle East, the population of the Middle East is not, when you take out Egypt and then the African countries in the Middle East, the population of the entire Middle East is not even up to the population of West Africa. And the crisis in West Africa actually get underreported. And because it's underreported by the global media, definitely the response also followed the same trajectory. And that's what you see. In the crisis in Nigeria, for instance, a whole lot of, in fact, if you look at the 71,000 missing person, I'm sure the figure for Nigeria will be almost about 24,000 out of it. That tells you a whole lot of things going on in that space. Now, that's one. When you look at national disasters also, I think Africa is getting into this mix where we have a lot of flooding, we have droughts happening. And those are why we call it national disaster is because, yeah, it happens because of maybe climatic conditions, of course, that people still deny. And the truth is that most of these things are not necessarily people's making. For instance, if the global north is actually responsible for creating catastrophic climate condition, and the people that are bearing the brunt are somewhere in Africa, definitely. But when you look at the direction of travel, especially in North Africa, I mean in North America, in terms of the US, you see politicians that should know better are actually feeding misinformation and even throwing face around. And even owners of platforms like X or Twitter fueling up misinformation around these issues. And the people paying for these things are actually the working poor in Africa. It's quite unfortunate, and then more importantly, also in Asia. It's painful when you see such things happening, and then because of the influence of African leaders, of course, because they themselves they have question marks. They could not carry their influence across and force actions globally. Then we find ourselves where we are now. It's quite unfortunate when you look at it from national disaster. But that said, also, I think there are some things that needs to begin to happen in Africa in terms of investment. For instance, the Green Wall of Africa to actually help address issues around draft. Those things, reaction the lake shard, for instance, that has exacerbated a lot of challenges within that ambit itself. And then you have a couple of other issues also going on. And so we need to begin to invest in addressing those in those green initiatives to begin to stem this tide of natural disaster. Then more importantly, these dangerous migratorial journeys that people take, people trying to cross over. Because of that, people are being because again, people are vulnerable. People are looking for economic. People want to make better lives. People want to be able to live in a comfortable house without fear of being kidnapped. People want electricity. People want water, save water. People want to raise their family in a very conducive environment. The unfortunate truth is because of the geopolitics of Africa, we find ourselves missing those bits itself. And explainably, people will typically move because there are no channels for people to move. Definitely people are exploring that also. Those are the three big blocks. How do we address it? I think again it comes down to a whole lot of economical issues. I think the world needs to be more responsive to Africa. The truth is that most of the challenges Africa are facing, whether we like it or not, people say, oh, it's Africans, you should take initiative, are the real creations of the people that actually draw the line on the sands of Africa. I tell people will say, what am I talking about? This happened years ago. That's not true. The way, if you look at the conflict that we have in Nigeria, you see the conflicts, you see Mali, those are issues that it's not necessarily the working poor, the have not in those communities that created them. It's a accumulation of a whole lot of things. For instance, movement of small arms across Africa, caches of arms flowing across. Who is fueling these things? Why is it not moving across in Europe? So those are the big elephants in the room. And until we begin to address those issues, unfortunately, these things we may continue to see more terrible. I mean, the direction of travel may look very, very unpleasant for many people. And I hope this is not the situation. I mean, this is not the situation we find ourselves.
All right. I don't know if you can answer this question in 2 minutes, but just try. So there's a human trafficking component, in this particular issue. And so human trafficking networks across Africa, can you hear me? I think
Yes, I can hear you.
So there's a human trafficking problem, part of this issue, and that's contributed to the disappearance of thousands of people, vulnerable women, children who are being exploited and who probably will never be seen again. But I want to ask that how can African governments, international organizations collaborate to dismantle these trafficking networks and also improve, recovery efforts for victims?
I think every body of I think the first thing is I think at the AU level, I think there needs to be I'll call it a framework that supports countries that are actually paying the brunt of this. I think at the AU level, a lot of pressure needs to be exerted on some leaders of Africa, right? Whether it's North Africa, where most of these things emanate from. I think a lot of pressure is needed. I know, for instance, there are a lot of frameworks that have been put in place to address some bits of this. But the truth is that without the help of the global north in terms of security in Africa, we may not be able to achieve much. And unfortunately, there seems to be a split in how the world, people see the world now. For instance, the US, you see the Russian influence in Africa. So you see China's influence in Africa. And then those are actually tearing people apart and then forcing people more into, I'll call it a state of where people actually are beginning to build different silos across Africa. My big take here is that I don't have I wish I had a golden bullet to solve this problem. But I will say that some of these frameworks that we've done, I think it's time to review some of them. I think there needs to be a charter across Africa to ensure that this thing is not allowed to happen. And then more importantly, when we begin to address the economic issues in Africa, we may begin to see shifts and changes. But that said, I think it's a complex question, what you've asked me. I wish I had time to break them down one by one. I will end by saying that the vulnerable itself are people that do not have control over what they can do in their present predicament, and that is why they are being exploited. So if you can take them away from that vulnerable state and you elevate them to another position, or you build systems and process around them to ensure that people do not exploit their vulnerability to their own for their own personal gain, then we can now say we are moving in the right direction. That is a very complex topic because there are people being exploited for sexual reasons, for financial reasons. It's a whole lot of things. If I'm to list it, a long thing. So it's a big thing we need to do. Again, I think we need to revisit some of the framework we have and then begin to work to ensure that, yes, the direction of travel is actually to help the working poor and the have-nots.
All right. I sincerely wish you had a magic wand, to just fix this problem, but we only have your answers, your analysis. So thank you so much for participating in today's episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah. And to all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. For deeper insight into our work, visit our website at sbmintel.com and remember to connect with us on social media. You can find us on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. That will be all for today. Thank you for listening. Bye.